Welcome to On Fire, the only official Survivor podcast. I'm Jeff Probst, the host and showrunner of Survivor. Each week, I'm joined by Jay Wolf, Survivor fan and the executive producer of this podcast. Hello, Jay.
What's up, Jeff?
As well as former Survivor player, season 46. He was the runner-up, Charlie Davis. What's up, Charlie?
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
It's going great. And each week, this is what we do on this podcast. We dissect the big moments of the most recent episode of Survivor, and we bring you insights from three different points of view: the fan in Jay, the player in Charlie, and the producer in me. So let's get into the big moments from episode 13. Jay, what stood out?
Well, I think we got to start with the fact that episode 13 is not the season finale of Survivor 47.
Whoa.
So, Jeff, to start, what motivated the change to a two-part finale here with a complete additional episode, and how did you approach this differently than you would another season?
Well, it really started with CBS asking us months before we shot if it would be possible for season 47 to do 14 episodes instead of 13. They had some things they wanted to try in their schedule, and part of that working out would depend on whether or not we could do 14 episodes. So we just sat down, Matt and I sat down and broke the finale down into parts and examined if and how we could pull it off. And what we really quickly realized was, if we structured it so that part one got us down to 4 players, then in part 2, we could spend a lot more time with our final 4 as we lead into the final 4 challenge, and then the fire making, and then the final 3, and then the final tribal council, because typically our finales are so full of content that we end up not having enough time to show all the stories we'd like to show. So it actually really worked out because we could highlight things we didn't typically highlight. And it was a great reminder to us that sometimes you need to step back and examine what you're doing, because just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it always has to stay that way.
Okay, I want to go to the next moment, which is the opening of the show. And as you've told me on this podcast before, this is not an easy thing to do.
Welcome to a special 2-hour penultimate episode of Survivor 47. Like any season of Survivor, this one's been unique, and it's really centered around 2 big themes. Number 1, a constant shift of power. Every player in the game has been on the bottom and the top. The other theme is some very savvy social gameplay, which has made it very hard to know who's telling the truth and who's lying, and it's led to some big moments like last week's Operation Italy, a beautifully executed charade that took Caroline out of the game and left us with 6 players.
So what happens after this is you walk through the rest of the tribal council set, and we see every nook and cranny until all of a sudden the camera zooms out huge to reveal the entire tribal council. Jeff, can you walk us through what it takes to make this shot happen?
All right, let's dig in again, get technical, and maybe blow your mind with how much detail goes into a shot like this. The shot was created by Scott Duncan. Scott has a massive role and impact on the show. He's the DP responsible really for the overall look of how we shoot things. Charlie knows Scott Duncan because every player wants to be shot by Scott.
You want to look good, get shot by Scott.
He does, our main title. He does all those images along with Russ Phil, who works very closely with him. All those high-speed shots at a challenges when you see somebody pop up out of the water in slow motion and their intensity on their face. Edge of Extinction, we created a very specific look. That was Scott Duncan. He's involved in everything about the show. His fingerprints are everywhere. So for this shot, we wanted to do something fun, but we also wanted it to feel big. And we wanted the audience to understand, okay, here we go. It's the beginning of the finale. And we wanted to do it with no edits. So here's what Scott set up. First, we get Tribal lit up. Everything's lit up. That's Moses Photophil and Shala Castillo and Ian Tucker, who handles all our fires. Then we have our grip department. And for this shot, they create a custom piece of gear for this one shot.
But wait, what's a grip department, though?
Okay, great question. A grip department in television and film is responsible for setting up and overseeing all the various pieces of equipment that support the camera and lighting departments.
Okay.
So Callum Anderson runs our grip department. So anytime we're in the water, where are the cameras? They're on big platforms in the water. That's the grip department. When you see a dolly shot in a challenge that's tracking somebody, well, that dolly, that's set up by the grip department. They're one of the most respected crews on any shoot because they are the workhorses. They're the team that makes all those pretty shots possible.
Got it.
All right, so back to the shot. So imagine that we have this custom bar, just like a long metal pole. And in the middle of it is a stabilizing head. It's attached to this bar. So two of our grips, it was Jeremy Faganelli and Morag Anderson. Morag, by the way, the daughter of Callum Anderson, our key grip, one of our many family connections here. They're on either side of this bar, and they're holding it as they're going to walk through tribal council with the camera dangling on the stabilizing head. So how do you control the camera? Well, remotely, we have a couple of people from our camera department. Kenny Hoffman, by the way, his dad also works on our show. What? And we have Granger Schultz that night. And then Spencer Tuttrup, our video engineer, he was there. They're all controlling if the camera's going to pan left or tilt up and making sure that the picture in the frame is right at every moment, including the focus, because it's all being done remotely. So we start at the farthest end of tribal council, and Scott lays this shot out. So we're going to slowly reveal more and more of tribal.
Okay.
So we're all moving together through the corners, around the torches, and I'm being lit by another person. Ian Tucker has got a single torch, a flame. He's holding it in his hand. He handles all of our fires. So he's got that flickering on my face. So he's walking next to the two grips who are holding the pole with the camera as I walk, and we are all walking together at the exact same pace, because if I speed up and get closer to the camera, or I slow down and get farther away from the camera, that will change the focus. So that's another variable that they're dealing with remotely. We're not done. Now we're going to add in another element. We've got Paulo Castillo on a techno crane, which is a big piece of gear. Charlie, you saw this at Tribal every week.
Every time.
It's a telescopic camera crane. So he starts tracking with the techno crane alongside the group of us, matching our pace because we're about to do a handoff. Like when you do with a baton in a relay race and somebody sticks their hand out.
Epic.
That's what we're going to do. So if you look at that shot, when I start up the steps of tribal council, what's happening is the grips are taking that bar that's holding the camera and they're lifting it onto two hooks that are on the techno crane, and then they let go. And now the techno crane has the camera. So it's literally a handoff from humans to gear, but you don't notice it because everything is done so well. It's seamless. So I walk up the steps, and as I start up the steps, Paulo's now in charge. He backs off with that techno crane and starts to telescope away, and the shot gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's really very similar to what Sam Mendes did in 1917. It's movie magic.
Beautiful.
I got to be honest. I watched this shot and I wrote down, they had to use a drone here because of how close it was to you and then how far the shot got out. But that obviously was not the case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people now mistakenly think a lot of shots are drones when they aren't necessarily. And here's the reason why. Drones are great. We use them a lot on Survivor. But drones still have one big issue. They make noise.
Yeah.
Something's powering that drone. So they work in certain situations. But in this case, we've got Ryan England on my audio. This is a very intimate shot. I'm talking quietly. Here we are. It's the final. You can't have a motor from a drone going. So the drone wouldn't work, but that's how we got the shot. And I got to say, I am proud of our team. And what I always forget to say is Duncan had that team out there, and Dryden's out there who directs all of our tribals. I mean, we had everybody out there, but Duncan rehearsed that for 2 nights without me.
Yeah.
So that's after we're done shooting, they're still working, trying to get this shot right so that when I come, everything's laid out. It's really respectful of how everybody treats everybody, and it's why we get those kind of shots.
You know, I was going to ask, how many takes did this end up taking? Because it is something that it requires so many different elements to work.
Jay, I'm so glad you said that, because what's interesting about that from my point of view is I show up, and I'll admit that's a lot to remember.
Yeah.
You know, I write it, so I mean, it's in my head, but it's a lot, and you got to be word perfect. So what happens to me is I'm only thinking about one thing. You are not going to be the person that messes up this shot because you've got half your crew out here and they're all going to be great. So typically how it works is when I deliver it and it's well delivered, we got the shot because our technical team, they're always right.
All right. Well, with that, let's start the episode of Survivor, shall we?
All right.
The first thing I want to highlight is what happens when everyone gets back from Tribal. Rachel has obviously emerged as a huge threat. So she takes a page out of the book of Tony.
I think one of the things that you can't grasp at home, because you always see the like infrared camera and it feels like there's got to be a flashlight somewhere, but you can't see anything. It's dark. It's pitch black. I mean, I couldn't see them. I could only hear them. So I'm following their voices. And I basically crawl on my belly underneath a bush right next to them. And I just listen to their entire conversation.
I mean, she has got to be maybe 5 feet away from where they're having this conversation.
I know.
Charlie, can you elaborate on what Rachel's telling us about just how dark it is, and how does Rachel manage to get to where she's going with no light?
Well, this is how you know we are on the ball over here at the On Fire podcast, because we talked about this earlier this season when Rome couldn't read his idol note in the dark.
Right.
And of course, we talked about how you can't see anything, and that makes it really tough for the players. Of course, the obvious difficulty for Rachel is how's she going to find them in the dark? She can be guided by their voices, but that's a lot harder to actually track them down when you can't see a thing. But I think we have to call out here, and sort of is implied in your question, the darkness is also Rachel's ally here, because of course she's going to have a tough time walking around. But Andy, Sam, Genevieve, and Teeny, they won't be able to see her spying, which is huge for her.
It's a really good point, Charlie. And something you've done a lot this season is reminded me and future players, every situation is an opportunity. You just got to find where the opportunity lies. And here, as you say, the darkness can actually be an asset.
Yeah, risk and reward.
Well, I want to stay with the darkness for a second, Jeff. I know we also talked about this a bit earlier this season, but it's pitch black. It's late at night. How do the multiple camera teams that are here go about capturing this as to not give away Rachel and also find their way in the darkness?
Yeah, there are 2 parts really to this answer. The first part maybe seems vague, but they're just incredibly experienced reality shooters and audio gatherers. And by experience, I don't just mean, they've done this for years. They've had a camera on their shoulder for a long time. I mean, they're very experienced at doing a show like Survivor, where at times secrecy is essential, not just for Rachel, also for the people on the beach having their own conspiratorial conversation. So reading body language or anticipating where a story is going is also essential when you're a camera operator or an audio gatherer, because at any given moment, on any given day on Survivor, our shooters and audio teams are co-conspirators with different players, depending on what is happening. So in this case, on one hand, they're secretly shooting a group of people in the sand, while another crew is secretly shooting Rachel. And on top of all of this, the darkness doesn't just impact the players. It impacts our crew as well. They can't see either.
Yeah.
So, when the sun sets in Fiji, there's no ambient light in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
That is why we took a moment and took the screen to black. So you could actually imagine, because that is what it looks like.
Yep.
The other factor in this, as Charlie, I think, can also attest to, we shoot everything. We don't just shoot the interesting moments. We shoot hours and hours of players talking about their favorite foods.
Oh, yeah.
All sorts of things that'll never end up in the show. We do this for 2 reasons. Number one, and most importantly, you never know when a conversation about a player's favorite recipe is going to turn into talk of a blindside. But number 2 is we also do it so the players never have any idea if what we're shooting is noteworthy or not. And what I mean by that is, just because we follow someone into the jungle, it doesn't mean that person's looking for an idol. 90% of the time, they aren't. And the reason this is valuable to a player is that it helps them relax a little bit about the cameras and keep their attention where it should be, on the other players. That is where the game moves. Don't worry about us. We see you. We'll capture what you're doing. We got your back. You just focus on playing.
All right, well, let's quickly talk about the aftermath of what Rachel learns here. The insight that Rachel is the target. Does it get any clearer than that? And I think what I'm trying to ask, and I'm doing it in a roundabout way, is why aren't we seeing more spy shacks on Survivor?
Well, let's break it down, Jay, because it does seem like a foolproof strategy sometimes. We saw Tony do it. Now we see Rachel do it. But I do think there are some risks, even if we've seen it used successfully. And number one, the risk is that if you get caught spying in the bushes, in the darkness, people are going to see that you're playing too hard and they're going to say, you got to go, because we want to be able to have free and clear conversations. But there's another really big risk, which I think you see in this exact episode, and that's misinformation. I think there's a tendency to think that because you were spying on someone, because they didn't know you were listening, that the information you're hearing is true. But look at this exact episode. Rachel heard that Genevieve has an idol. We as the audience know that's a fake idol.
Right.
But Rachel, because she was spying, because she's trusting this information so much, is all of a sudden 100% convinced that Genevieve has a real idol. And we're seeing in this episode that has some major consequences.
Yep.
Reason number 567 Charlie did so well when he played Survivor. All right, when we come back, an attempt at jury management turns out to be a ticket to the jury. We'll be right back. Welcome back to On Fire, the only official Survivor podcast. All right, Jay, next moment.
All right, let's go to later at the beach when Andy decides to come clean to Rachel about his intentions for tribal council.
I would guess that this approach from Andy is coming from a place of jury management. He thinks that I'm heading to the jury next. And hearing Andy kind of talk about himself, it does give me pause. I started seeing him as more of a threat than I was giving him credit for.
I'm thinking about the important relationships I take from this game, and you're absolutely at the top. And I want to just say goodbye to you.
Andy is trying to win me over. But instead, it actually just made me question whether Andy was a better option to go home tonight than Sam.
You know, I don't know that anyone should be saying goodbye to anyone before Jeff says the tribe has spoken, but Charlie, it does end up becoming Andy's Achilles heel. So I'm curious if you think jury management has a place in the game at this point, and is it just that you need to be more subtle?
Oh my goodness. Jay, if I knew the answer to that question, I'd be a lot better off. This is the tightrope. You want to be considered enough of a threat that you'll get votes at the end, but not too much of a threat that you'll be voted out. And that was not very many words, but it is, I think, the most complex part of the Survivor endgame. Andy was facing this crisis head on. He was worried that no one was taking his game seriously, and so he tried to correct that. He's trying to really manage who he thinks is going to be the next juror. But of course, Rachel has an idol, and it turns out that he overcorrected, because if he hadn't done this with Rachel, he gets to keep sliding under the radar a little bit. But I don't know if he was wrong to do this. It's so hard to say, because if he hadn't done it, maybe he gets to final tribal council and gets 0 votes. That's why the end game is so hard.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Jay, you said, I don't know if you should ever say goodbye to somebody. You have seen times on the show when the person going home is told they're going home, and it is the person going home, and people are very strategic about how they handle being in charge of that, saying, I just want to let you know it's you, and I'm sorry it's you, but I didn't want you to be blindsided. That can garner some favor if you get to the end. So I'm with Charlie, even though I've never played. I've watched enough players do this. It's a risk reward like everything on Survivor, but you got to trust your gut. And I think Andy is in a hole in trying to win this game. So he's going to need every vote he can get. So maybe it was a Hail Mary that didn't work, but it showed that he's playing and playing hard.
I'll also say fascinating gameplay from Rachel here, because she really primed him to open up to her by saying, I don't think anyone's taking you seriously at all. She's gathering information, even though she knows that she's safe with that idol.
Yeah, she's got amazing gameplay throughout this episode. She's also got this banger of a line at the first tribal council of the episode.
You know, Jeff, I think the only thing better than attending your own funeral is knowing that you're going to wake up alive the next morning.
That's pretty good.
I mean, come on. So, Jeff, as we do see Andy head to the jury, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on him before we move on to the rest of the episode.
Andy personifies everything I love about Survivor. And here's why. He was completely authentic. He was completely vulnerable. He let us see his struggles. He also let us witness his resiliency. He never apologized for who he was. He also never excused any of the things he did. He owned his horrible start. He claimed victory with Operation Italy. I really enjoyed having Andy on the show. And for what it's worth to future players, Andy did not get on the first time we met him. He had to come back next year and apply again. And then we thought he was ready. And I think he would agree it was the right time.
All right, let's go to the challenge now that we are at the final 5. We're stacking balls from a wobbly beam, and we're running it back to a challenge we haven't seen this version of since Survivor 36 Ghost Island's Final Immunity Challenge. Now, go with me for a second here, guys. I couldn't help but think about the showdown between Wendell and Dom in that season.
Oh, yeah.
Ending with this immunity challenge before going to fire. And in this episode, we get a showdown between Rachel and Genevieve, also down to the last moment, also down to a toppling tower and the other person calmly finishing. Obviously, this is happenstance. But with such an immense back catalog, Jeff, do you ever consider past season arcs or major moments as you look at bringing back iconic challenges into the game?
Well, I wish I had been as studied on this challenge as you were, because I would have made that comparison in this challenge. But it's interesting that you asked this question now, because until recently, we never did what you're suggesting. We merely looked at things like, when was the last time we did it? Should we bring it back? How did it play? Do we need to modify anything? How big of a build is it for our teams? Those kinds of considerations. But lately, we have started doing exactly what you said, which is, we'll remember a great challenge that had big moments, and then we'll bring it back so that the players can be part of extending the legacy by making their own version equally epic, which is what happened in this one. And you might even start to see me reference that more and more in future seasons by reminding players what I wish I had done here, is saying, last time we did this, Dom versus Wendell, we remember that season. Is that happening right now with Rachel and Genevieve? Oh my God, in an almost exact replica of what happened years ago. I could have done that, and I wish I had. And I love that you brought it up, and we're talking about this because it also reminds the audience, we don't remember everything. We can't get all of it. So I love these suggestions, and I love when somebody on our crew will come up and say, hey, do you remember such and such happened? And I'll put that in my little Rolodex of thoughts, and maybe it comes into the show, maybe it doesn't. But I think as Survivor 50 approaches, we are starting to look at the history of our show through a different lens, and this is really a big example of that.
Yeah. So I want to get into the mechanics a little bit, Charlie. They experience failure after failure after failure. How hard is it to stay motivated in a challenge that, as Jeff said during it, it's engineered for you to fail a bunch of times before you get it right?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. I think for me personally, these are some of the hardest challenges mentally that Survivor has to offer. For me, I consider myself pretty good under pressure, but we had a challenge like that on my season. It was a snake maze where you were maneuvering a ball, and that ball must have dropped about 300 times during that challenge. And I can still remember it to this day. Liz was next to me. She was singing a song to herself, and it was annoying the crap out of me. And then your ball falls again, and you get even more annoyed. And then, Jeff, you are still there doing your thing. And you don't have the time or the ability, especially in these types of balance challenges, to look to your right, to look to your left. All you have for updates is Jeff saying, so-and-so's in first. So-and-so's way in the lead. So-and-so is terrible at this challenge. And you're just trying your best to create the mental picture of where you are in the middle of that. Of course, sometimes you get your own special shout out. Hopefully it's a good one. But it is incredibly, incredibly challenging. And Jeff, you know from this challenge, from the dozens you've done like it, you're going to be giving lead updates that are changing every single second.
Yeah.
So it is such a yo-yo, a roller coaster, whatever you want to call it for the players, because half the time Jeff is updating you, you're in the lead all of a sudden, and you were in last place a second ago, so you're pumped. And then he's letting everyone know that you lost your progress, you're back in last place. So it just makes it this mental quagmire for the players of this just brutal, brutal up and down.
Glad I can help. Okay, one more break. When we come back, it's time to vote. And Teeny is not sure what decision to make. How long can you really stand up there at Tribal before you actually write a name down on the parchment? We'll be right back. Welcome back to On Fire, the only official Survivor podcast. All right, Jay.
All right, so we get to the vote, and Teeny has gone through a lot this episode. She has had her mind blown by Sam letting her know that Genevieve's idol is actually fake. Now she needs to vote for Genevieve, even though she was thinking Sam. She gets up to vote. She's still unsure, and she tells us, I'm going to decide in the next 30 seconds. Charlie, is there like a voting decorum? How long are folks up there before everyone back down on the seats are like, what is going on?
Great question. I think it's one of those things where you know it when you see it, when you're sitting in the tribal seat. Because on the one hand, as soon as everyone starts to go vote, you know that feeling on a roller coaster when your stomach either goes to your face or sinks to the floor?
Sure.
That is the feeling as soon as everybody starts to vote, because you're completely quiet. There's no more talking. There's no more game playing. It's pen to parchment, and then Jeff's going to read the votes. So that feeling is not exactly fun to sit with. And then on the second hand, from a gameplay's perspective, you don't want to seem wishy-washy, because if you're up there for so long, people are thinking, wait a minute, Teeny and I talked about who we were all voting for. Why is Teeny taking so long to vote? So it's a combination of you don't want to annoy people and make them feel the stress of tribal, and you don't want to hurt your in-game reputation.
I want to poke at this, what you do when people are voting a little bit more, and I want to turn it on you, Jeff.
Okay.
There was a moment here where you were in the shop when everyone was voting, and you were sort of looking down. You seemed very stoic. I was curious about your during the vote routine.
Well, while the players are voting, everything Charlie said is what's going through my head. Is I'm aware that this is a very big moment and that for someone, their dream is about to end. So I don't really have a routine. I just have focus, and I try to remain neutral because it's what Charlie just said. I'm respectful of the fact that for every player, the vote is anxiety-inducing, even though they may not show it because they can't, because as Charlie said, you got to show solidarity and appear to believe that your alliance is strong. But every player knows that it is quite possible it's them going home tonight. They're going to be blindsided. So I always have that in the back of my mind, this thought that for someone, their dream is about to end and it's happening right now.
Well, ultimately, that dream does end for Genevieve, who played a killer game, left Sam to breathe another day, and cemented our final four. Jeff, what are your thoughts on Genevieve as she joins the jury?
Well, just like Andy, Genevieve did not get on the first year we met her, only because we had so many good people and we couldn't figure out the right spot. So here are my notes from the first time I met her 2 years ago. Love her, love her, love her, love her. She is so cool. Funny sense of humor, great sense of self. Didn't get on the show. Saw her again in 2023.
Wow.
First thing I wrote down, love her even more. How is she not on the show? High achiever all the way, very self-aware, great emotional intelligence. And I'd just like to say, my notes are pretty accurate. Genevieve was a stellar player. Genevieve could have won this game had she gotten to the end.
Fully. Okay, last thing here, Jeff. I want to end where we started. And I know you addressed a final three earlier, but is there a world where there's a final three that becomes a final two?
Oh?
Well, you know what? That would be the way I would have set it up if we were doing a final two. You're right. It's certainly possible, but I don't want to have, speculation that goes nowhere. It's not a final two. So I don't want to confuse or disappoint anybody, but I will say it is a tremendous finish to a great season.
All right, I guess I'll put my final two dreams away for season 48. All right, let's get to some fan questions. As a reminder, if you have a question for Jeff or Charlie or for me, you can email us. The email address is survivorshoutout@cbs.com. I literally read all of your questions in the inbox, and thank you so much for all of them. I might read yours like this one from Charlotte that says, thank you for running the show and the podcast. I love Survivor. Thanks, Charlotte. My question is about the torches. Do players have certain torches that they mark as their own? Do they decorate them with beads or other objects to make them more personal?
Yes, the torches are a big deal for the players because literally they represent their life in the game. So that's important. But also they are this touchstone. And each player has their initials carved in there by our art department. But players will adorn their torches in various ways. I've seen players carve their names of their kids and things like that. Or maybe there's something from tree mail, a piece of ribbon, and they tie around it.
Yeah.
But here's something we've changed regarding the torches. For the first many seasons, like the first 40 seasons, we would auction the torches off along with other Survivor memorabilia to raise money for various charities. And we have raised literally millions of dollars for charities.
Wow.
But recently we realized, we ask so much of the players and we've always just stripped them of everything when they leave except their stinky clothes. And kind of like what we talked about earlier, taking a step back and examining your process. Why do we do what we do? And it really struck me the hardest, which is they should get their torches. And I know we're going to make a little less money for the charity, but we ask an awful lot of these players. And I think that's just something that needs to be updated. And so now we give the players their torches. We still auction off lots of other stuff and still raise a lot of money, but I feel much better about that. And to previous Survivor players who were listening saying, I had to bid on my own torch. I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I'll add, Jeff, the torch makes a much better apartment showpiece than our stinky clothes. It is awesome. It is awesome, awesome, awesome. Way cooler than you could ever
Where's
imagine.
yours?
Oh, it's front and center, right next to the TV. I'm always looking at that thing. It is epic. It's still got the Fiji soot all over it. It is sweet.
Nice.
Question 2 comes from Wayne. As a lifelong amateur astronomer and an astrophotographer, I absolutely love seeing the time-lapse shots of the Milky Way, the night sky, and the moon on the show. Is there an astronomer or astrophotographer that consults with the show? I'd love to know about the planning and equipment used to shoot those sequences, as well as learning about the post-production of it.
Well, that's a big question, but I'll give you a sort of a broad overview. We don't have any astronomers or astrophotographers per se, but we do have a dedicated team, and we do focus on nighttime. Basically, when the sun sets, we go into night mode. Scott Duncan is a big part of this. Peter Weary, the DP of Reality, is as well. He's a co-conspirator with Scott. But Scott will arrange different shoots with a drone team, or maybe our specialty camera ops. Russ Phil's part of that. Paulo, who was on the Techno Crane, he's a part of this. And we're testing constantly by experimenting with new looks, new approaches, and new tools. There are all kinds of new cameras coming out that have night vision. We use IR lights. Some are big, some are small. We have different sensors. Sometimes we'll engage an old camera that just happens to have great low light visibility, and it's perfect for this one shot that our teams have in mind. So if you imagine how we look at it is the nighttime sky can be a variety of things. It can be completely black, or there could be a full moon. Maybe the full moon is lighting up the entire tribe camp. So that indicates how we'll shoot. Maybe there's no moon. Maybe there are stars or no stars. So when you're shooting, you're taking in the environment, and then you're deciding the best approach. And what gets lost a lot of times on me is that means somebody's up at night doing this. And so there are different people that will rotate. I'm sure there are more hours put into this show than I have any idea. But what it comes down to, more than anything else, is it's pure passion. You don't wake up and see the call sheet and it says, Paulo, you will be on nights tonight. Ha, ha, ha. See you at 5 a.m. These are people that they care so much. And then we take all these shots back home and then our editors go, whoa, that nighttime time lapse over 12 hours from sunset to sunrise is the perfect metaphor for a new beginning for Andy. And suddenly it finds its place in the show. I'm really so proud to be a part of the show. And this is just another reason why.
Totally. All right. Last question comes from Justin. They write, what happened to the iconic phrase at Tribal Council? Once the votes are read...
You mean this one? Once the votes are read, the decision is final. Person voted out will be asked to leave the Tribal Council area immediately. I'll read the votes.
Ooh.
Yeah, that one. I love that line. I hated letting it go, but the history on it is it actually started as a real direction to the players. Because the show was so new, I had to tell them the rules. And the rules are whoever gets the most votes is out, and you got to go. You can't stay, you can't debate, you can't negotiate. But over the years, it first it started to become sort of iconic. And then it got to a point where now it's a little unnecessary. And as we talk about this on this podcast a lot, timing is so important. And that sentence is probably about 5 seconds. And that doesn't sound like much, but those 5 seconds could be used somewhere else that would be more impactful in terms of the storytelling. And I'll give you a specific example. You could be at tribal council where I was going to say that in about 10 minutes. And instead of me saying that, you hold on a shot of Charlie as he listens to something a player is saying, and you register in his eyes, he's redeciding about what he's going to do right now. Well, that might take 5 seconds. You need that. You don't need me saying those words. But what's really funny is sometimes, like on day 21, when I too am tired, I'll be up there with the votes and I'll have to remind myself, you don't say that anymore. Take that out. Because it's almost, it's like it's so embedded in my head that I'm just going to say it. I'm like a robot sometimes. Okay, that's it for this week's episode of On Fire. If you enjoy the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it if you just take a moment right now and say, I'm going to go rate, and then I'm going to write a little review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts because I want to help other Survivor fans find the show. Charlie, do you have a review you can share?
Oh yeah, what about this one from Apps Rock, which is just so nice. My dad passed away suddenly in July. Him and my mom would always watch together since season 1. So I joined in on the fun to help support her. And of course, got into it myself. But I have so many questions about the behind the scenes. Glad this podcast helps shed light on some of those while diving into the standout moments of each episode. Honestly, Survivor could have a companion behind-the-scenes show for every episode and get just as many views.
Apps Rock, just want to say sorry for the loss of your dad and glad that you are picking up the support with your mom and keeping that tradition going for her. And if you leave us a review, we might just read it here, so do that wherever you listen to podcasts. Next week is the finale of Survivor 47. It all begins at 8, 7 Central on CBS and Paramount Plus, and immediately following the episode, there's a new episode of this podcast, On Fire, where, Charlie, we will have right here the very first interview with the winner of Survivor 47. See you then.
Paramount Podcasts.